power do you have right now? Do you really have a say in who sits in there? And can you change the way your country is run? Or are you just a pawn in an outdated system run by the elites? We're investigating democracy in the UK. Now, in the last video, we talked about the House of Lords. That's where some unelected politicians can still inherit a seat in Parliament from their parents. Lucky devils. But the problems with British democracy don't end there, which is why we're now going to look at the House of Commons. We're going to investigate how much power you, the people of this country, have. Do your votes really count when you elect MPs to Parliament? Do you have a say in what kind of government gets formed? And do the most powerful institutions in the UK represent you, the public? First off, let's talk about the weird system we use to elect our MPs. We currently use something called Firstpastthepost, where the candidate with the most votes in each constituency wins the seat. Now, while that's a simple system where the winner takes it all, it does mean you get a lot of so-called wasted votes. That's because the winner doesn't need a total majority of the votes. They just need to beat their nearest rivals. For example, say I'm running in a constituency with 100 voters, and I am one of 5 candidates. I receive 21 votes. 3 candidates, they receive 20, and the final candidate receives 19 votes. So I win the seat, but 79 voters, i.e. 79% of the electorate, voted for one of the other candidates. So while I'm victorious, the majority of the electorate did not choose me.
So at the last general election, 68% of people's vote made no difference to the overall outcome. We've got to stop discounting and ignoring the votes of people who don't vote for the right candidate in the right place. That's just not democratic.
Now, this system has made life difficult for some of the smaller parties like the Lib Dems, the Greens and UKIP. That's because while they might get a lot of votes across the whole country, in order to get a seat in Parliament, they need to be the #1 favourite in one constituency. And that creates some weird results. In the last general election, the Liberal Democrats got nearly 2.4 million votes, but they were scattered over loads of different constituencies, so they only ended up winning 12 out of 650 seats in the Commons. Basically, while they got 7.4% of the share of the vote, they only won 1.8% of the seats. Compare that to the Scottish National Party. Now, because support for them was a lot more concentrated on the map, they managed to win 35 seats, despite getting fewer than 1 million votes overall. That's why some parties from across the political spectrum are united in wanting to get rid of Firstpastthepost.
In 2015, the Tories actually won a majority, but they had a smaller share of the vote. So the system can skew. That's the important thing to remember. It isn't a true system, and proportional representation should give a better balance between the share of the vote and the number of seats that you win. We just don't have that in this country at the moment.
That's what also happened in 1951, when Winston Churchill became Prime Minister for the second time in his life. The Labour Party actually won slightly more votes overall, but Churchill's Conservatives won 26 more seats in Parliament, so he got to form the government. And remember, while we still use Firstpastthepost in our general election, there are places in the UK that use more proportional voting systems. The Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Assembly and the London Assembly use the additional member system, a form of proportional representation. And the Northern Ireland Assembly uses the single transferable vote, another form of PR that is actually the preferred choice of the Electoral Reform Society.
You can say, you look at your ballot sheet, there's 5 candidates. I know I want this one as my #1. If they don't get in, I would want this person to get in. And you know that your second vote will have some weight. It may not bring you the result, but at the moment it's a winner-takes-all system, and the majority of people in many, many seats feel that their vote has been wasted.
But isn't the problem with PR is that it leads to unstable governments? In Italy, they've had more than 60 since 1946. Israel's having a second election.
If you look at the Nordic countries, if you look at Belgium, if you look at the Netherlands, it's absolutely standard practice to fight for your own party on a banner, and most people will know whether you're right wing, left wing or centre, and then after the election to come together as an alliance of whichever the biggest grouping is.
Do you worry though that with PR you could allow more extremist parties to have seats in Parliament?
But I think it's important that we don't change to a system that works to voters because we're worried about a particular style of politics. The point about a democracy is that politicians of all parties have got to put the case forward, including those of us who don't support right-wing parties, saying this is dangerous, you shouldn't vote for them because, and that's important too. Voters then need to make their choice.
There was a referendum on this very issue in 2011. As part of the coalition agreement between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives, the British public were asked whether they wanted to adopt the alternative vote method. That's where voters get to rank their preferred choices, and where candidates are eliminated until one has at least 50% of the share of the vote. More than 13 million people voted to keep Firstpastthepost in place, with a pretty resounding 68% in favour. Firstpastthepost means that our elections aren't really about the total number of votes, it's about where you get your votes from. And that's why we have something called safe seats. That's where constituencies basically vote for the same party every time. So in somewhere like Hemsworth in Yorkshire, they've returned a Labour MP in every election since 1918. And here, in drizzly old Horsham, the sky may be grey, but they've been blue ever since 1880. If you don't vote Tory here, you haven't been successful in an election since 1876, when the Liberal MP James Clifton Brown was returned. That's when Queen Victoria was still on the throne and Benjamin Disraeli was the Prime Minister. We braved the rain to visit the Conservative Party's HQ here in Horsham. There, we met Adrian Lee, the chairman of the Conservative Association and a member since he was 18 years old. Is there a reason why Theresa May's picture is right by the exit?
No, it's pure coincidence.
So are you ever worried about Horsham ever not being a Tory-held seat?
Oh yes, I don't think it does any of us any good to be complacent and assume that just because people have voted Conservative previously, they're necessarily going to vote Conservative again.
Horsham is a safe Tory seat in a safe Tory area of the country. In 2017, the Tories won 72 out of 84 seats in the south-east of England. That means they got 85% of the seats. But the party only won 53% of the vote in the area.
Well, I suppose that's one way of looking at it, but I mean, you could make an opposite case, in Labour's northern strongholds.
And that's the problem of Firstpastthepost, is that it creates these areas where it becomes impossible for people who want a change to actually have it.
The system makes it more tricky, I grant you, but we saw in '97 Michael Portillo famously lost his seat, so there are occasionally changes, and if the opposition can garner enough support in any particular constituency, then they can do it, which is why I said earlier, we can't be complacent.
In recent years, the Tories have held Horsham with between 50 and 60% of the vote. But could PR change that and even alter the overall result in the southeast?
PR would not make a jot of difference in Horsham as to our electoral certainty of gaining an MP here. The model of us continuing to work hard, which we do, across the town, raising issues, campaigning, that is the way forward for Horsham Labour Party to win seats, and it will happen.
When will Labour win Horsham?
Labour winning Horsham as a constituency is some way off.
With Labour having no chance of taking places like Horsham and the Tories having no chance of winning seats like Hemsworth up in Yorkshire, political parties tend to focus their attention on just a handful of swing seats where there might be a chance of it changing hands. You could argue that voters in those places have a lot more democratic power than people here in Horsham. Thank you. Now, another issue we have is turnout. In the 1950 election, 83% of people voted. But in 2017, that had gone down to 68%. Now, what could be done to sort that out? Well, in places like Australia, they have compulsory voting. And there, more than 96% of people who are eligible to vote are registered. And more than 90% of people usually turn out and vote. And if they don't, they get given a fine. How much? So far, we've only talked about how we elect our MPs. What about how we form a government? Now, traditionally, it's whichever party has the most number of seats over in Parliament. But occasionally, every party does badly. No one has a majority. And in that case, the parties have to club together and form backroom deals or coalitions. Now that's happened twice recently, in 2010 and 2017. But the problem with forming coalitions is that sometimes politicians have to ditch the very promises on which they were elected. Take the Lib Dems in 2010. They promised they wouldn't raise university tuition fees, but they had to cut a deal with the Conservatives to get into power. So they went against that promise. Now voters, they'd already made up their mind, they'd already cast their ballot, and they couldn't change their mind until another 5 years later at the next election. Okay, so we've looked at the democratic problems with elections in the UK, but what about the stuff that we don't even get to vote on at all? How about the rest of the political system? Now, of course, when we elect our MPs, the party with the most seats gets to form a government, but the Prime Minister has to ask someone down the road for permission first. The Queen!
Hello!
And the Queen is not just a regal face. Technically, she still is in charge. Obviously, centuries ago, the monarch held all the power, and now it's more of a ceremonial role. Real executive and political power resides back over there in Parliament. You could point to other things as well, like judges and the whole criminal justice system. We don't, for example, get to vote on who the UK's top judges are, the ones who sit in the Supreme Court. In fact, not even MPs get to vote on our behalf. Instead, judges on the British Supreme Court are appointed there for life by the Prime Minister. Away from the Supreme Court, the judges that most people will deal with here in the UK are not elected or appointed by politicians. The United States is one of the few countries in the world that lets its people elect judges. But a big problem some people have with that is they say it stops judges from being impartial, given they might be more concerned about re-election than being independent. Basically, it means they can behave more like politicians. The thing is, loads of things about British politics are not exactly 100% democratic. But what can we do about it? In the past, politicians have said the solution is local government and devolution. They want political power to move from here and go to places like this instead, your local council or a national parliament. So the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Assembly and Northern Ireland Assembly all have control over areas such as education, healthcare and agriculture, while Parliament in London still decides foreign policy, national security, immigration and most economic matters. Now, there's valid arguments for and against devolution and local government, but it still doesn't solve the concerns some people have here in Westminster. And there's a risk that giving more power to local councils could actually be less accountable. Because let's be honest, most of us don't really pay much attention to what they're doing and keep on track of every single local politician. And at last year's local elections, up to 3/4 of people didn't even bother to vote in some areas. So is the UK truly democratic? Isn't the real issue our voting system? I mean, most of Western Europe doesn't use Firstpastthepost, they use PR. And don't forget that in trying to make our union more democratic, we've devolved power to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And all of them don't use Firstpastthepost. Some people like to call Westminster the mother of parliaments, this historic body that has evolved over centuries from one ruled by an all-powerful monarch into a democracy. We love our tradition here, but is it time to get rid of all that nostalgia? As Britain wades through the Brexit conundrum, maybe our democracy is ready and able to deal with whatever comes its way. I mean, it's done so for generations. Or maybe this is the perfect moment for us to change our political system for good.